Today we have a really exciting session. We're going to be covering an introduction to working with Monograph and QuickBooks Online. This session has been tailored for Monograph customers who are office managers, accountants, bookkeepers, or project managers who work with invoices, expenses, and vendor bills in their daily work. And so today, leading the webinar is Pete, our head of product, who many of you have had the pleasure to meet during either product research sessions or feedback sessions. He's fantastic. And he has built a great agenda covering pretty much everything that you would want to know as an intro, right? He's going to be covering the process of getting connected to QBO, sending invoices, and managing your consultant bills. As I mentioned before, and you can see here from this list, today's agenda is robust and we are recording it. So that way you are able to just watch along, keep your eyes on the screen as Pete navigates through different areas of our app and how it integrates with Monograph. And then we'll share that recording afterwards. So without further ado, Pete, take it away.
Thanks, Eileen. Thanks, everyone, for joining. See some familiar names in the list already. Shauna, Scott, thank you all for joining. These are folks that have actually helped shape some of the stuff we're going to be looking at today. So before we get into that agenda, which is essentially a list of the features that are supported by our QBO integration, let me talk about the value behind these things, essentially. At the end of the day, we want to provide your firm with insights, mostly around profitability. And I'm not just talking about reports that you can pull data from, but I'm talking about actionable notifications that you can actually act on. But to get to that point, we first need to integrate with QBO and build a seamless and reliable sync that pulls in a bunch of important data that only exists in your QBO instance. We spent a good bit of Q4 last year actually making our integration with QuickBooks seamless and reliable. On top of that, we're building a number of different features and user flows that allow you to save time and improve the accuracy, but essentially avoid accounting errors. We're going to see a bunch of those features today. Then on top of that, we're also going to be looking at how we are pulling in data out of your QBO instance to provide you with some project insights around profitability. And at the very end of this presentation, we'll be talking about some firm level profitability insights that are just around the corner. So as I go through these features, keep these three things in mind. They all do one or more of these three things for you. They all either save you time and or reduce the risk of bookkeeping errors, or they're built to provide insights to your firm's profitability. All the features we're going to go through today do one or more of these things. All right, let's dive in. First, the basics. For those of you out there who have not yet connected Monograph to QuickBooks, it's simple. It takes literally less than a minute. You're going to go into your settings area. You're going to look for a new tab that we've got that's focused and dedicated to the QuickBooks integration. It's going to look something like this. You're going to click on Connect. A little Intuit QuickBooks window is going to pop up. It's going to ask you to sign into your QuickBooks environment. Then you're going to pick your QuickBooks company name here, click Next, and you're done. It probably can be done quicker than I just explained it in how it's done. It should take no time at all. And once that's up and running, you're ready to start exploring some of the benefits, time savers, and integration points that I'm going to go through next. So the first thing you're probably going to want to do, especially if you're new to the integration between Monograph and QuickBooks, is synchronize your clients and your customers. So conceptually, we've got a bunch of clients in Monograph in our client directory. Similarly, in QuickBooks, you have a list of customers. They're very similar. We don't want you wasting any time with duplicate data entry, creating a client in Monograph and then creating the same customer over in QuickBooks. We synchronize these lists for you so that, for example, when you create a new client in Monograph, it automatically gets created in QuickBooks and vice versa. And if you update the data on a client that has been synchronized between the two systems, that data is immediately shared back and forth. Again, we're saving you time here by reducing the amount of data that you have to enter. For this, I'm actually going to jump into a live demo. We're going to jump right here into the Monograph client directory. Here is a firm that has not yet imported or synchronized any customers from QuickBooks. These are just three clients that I have created in my imagined early days of Monograph implementation. Now that I'm connected to QuickBooks, I'll see that this button up here allows me to import from QuickBooks. I'll click on that. And here I can see a number of customers that we've pulled in out of QuickBooks. So these are a bunch of customers that exist in QuickBooks. And you can see that over here on the right, I can merge some of those clients, some of those customers from QuickBooks with the clients in Monograph. So this is a list of the customers that are being pulled in from QuickBooks, and I can select which ones I want to import. I'm going to import them all. Now you can see there's a few here that might look familiar. Amy's Bird Sanctuary, you might remember on the last screen that I actually already had a client in Monograph called Amy's Sanctuary or something like that. Well, if I realize that I've got two items, a customer in QuickBooks and a client in Monograph that are actually the same, I can use this input over here to map them. And you can see that Monograph has already identified the fact that this name looks very similar to this name, so they must be the same. Therefore, let's merge them. If there were others that I needed to merge that didn't automatically map, they would be in this drop down for me to select. But you can see that Monograph did a pretty good job of figuring out, without any input from me, that Cool Cars is probably the same as Cool Cars, the Monograph client that already exists. So I'm going to actually merge this line, and this line with these inbound QBO clients. The rest of these clients that I'm pulling in, the rest of these customers that I'm pulling in from QuickBooks will be created in Monograph as new customers, as new clients. So let me go ahead and click import. It's asking me if there's a conflict, like for example, in an email address, it's asking me which data should take precedence. I'm going to use the QuickBooks data for precedence, import merge. There we go. Now we're looking at our new client list in Monograph, and you can see that I've got all of those QBO customers now imported and synchronized. Let's jump back over here. Went through that, we went through that, we went through that. Now, what may go without saying, but I'm going to point it out anyway, is that any changes to any of the data in Monograph or QuickBooks will be synchronized in the other direction. So for example, if I changed Amy's email address from birds to amy@intuit.com, about 30 seconds later, this would be updated in QuickBooks and vice versa. So we're going to keep that data in synchronized for you, save you time, and avoid any data entry errors. Also, if you create a client in Monograph, you're going to see a checkbox down here that allows you to immediately send that same client to QuickBooks, so you don't have to, again, make that duplicate entry over in your QuickBooks customer list. Lastly, if someone does create in a customer over in QuickBooks, you're going to see a banner in Monograph that alerts you to the fact that there's a new customer over in QuickBooks, and you should go ahead and import that customer now. You click on this button or this button, it'll take you through that same import flow you saw a second ago. So that's how we're going to save you a lot of time around synchronizing your client list in Monograph with your QuickBooks list over in QuickBooks, your QuickBooks customer list. Next, let's move on to one of the most effective time savers that we've got in this QBO Monograph integration. It's all about sending invoices and taxes to QBO. So in Monograph, we allow you to create these beautiful invoices. We want you to send those beautiful invoices directly to your client from Monograph because we can tell when they've seen those invoices and they can pay them online. We also want to support your bookkeeping processes by allowing you to send those same invoices over to QuickBooks. With the click of a button, you can take a Monograph invoice, press send to QuickBooks, and it will appear over in QuickBooks with the proper attribution for all the line items in that invoice, the right numbers, the right client information, etc. So let's take a look at that live as well. Kill this. So before you can send those invoices over to QuickBooks from Monograph, there's some configuration you want to do in this QuickBooks setting tabs. So you can see there's probably 8 things or so that you set up in Monograph to make sure that those invoices that we're sending to QuickBooks are properly configured. First thing you're going to want to do, actually most of the activities in setup you need to take here have to do with mapping the different types of line items that might appear in a Monograph invoice to the services that exist over in QuickBooks. These services are coming right out of this list. So if you are curious about where this is coming from, if you go to this gear button and go to products and services, that will take you to this list. You can see I've got some services that my firm offers here. What I'm doing right here is mapping the services, effectively the phases in this case, in Monograph to the services that exist over in QuickBooks, so that when I send an invoice that has some construction administration work in it, it's going to be associated with this service over in QuickBooks. You can see I've got all the services here to pick from. You obviously get to configure this however your bookkeeper wants you to configure it. That same type of mapping is available for expense categories. So if you're sending expense line items for billable expenses over to QuickBooks, you can map those to QuickBooks services as well. Same thing for your consultants. If you want particular types of consultants to be mapped to particular types of QuickBooks services, you can do so. In this case, I've just mapped them all to a service for subcontractors. So you're going to go through an activity like that, a configuration activity like that, for basically all of these different types of things that can appear in a Monograph invoice, so that when you send that invoice over to QuickBooks, all of those things are already automatically mapped and taken care of for you. So let's go over and actually send an invoice. Here I have an invoice. Let me go ahead and refresh this. 1 second. All right. So I've got an invoice here. It's a good chunk of money, $27,000. Notice it has not been sent to QuickBooks. It's already been sent to the client, though. You can see that right down here. I could choose to send this over to QuickBooks and associate it with the client, Amy's Bird Sanctuary. You probably remember that from our client customer syncing talk about 5 minutes ago. Something else that the Monograph integration allows you to do is to send this invoice not just to a client, but to one of the projects that you might have over in QuickBooks that are associated with this client. So if this particular invoice is associated with a particular project like Hollister Ranch or Wurtland Mall, these are two projects over in QuickBooks, and I could send it directly to those. Similarly, let's have a quick look at that actually. Where's that data coming from? So you can see Amy's Bird Sanctuary has two projects going on, Hollister Ranch and Wurtland Mall. Similarly, in the customer list, if you don't use projects, but you instead use sub-customers, those will appear as options in this input as well. So we'll let you send it we'll let you send an invoice not just to a QuickBooks customer, but to any project or any sub-customer within that customer directory. In this particular case, I'm just going to go ahead and send it to the Wurtland Mall. So now I'm going to click send. You can see successfully sent to QuickBooks Online. If you don't believe me, I'm going to go ahead and go find it. Let's remember this amount, 27021. Let's go to our sales, invoices. Let's see here. Where are you? There it is, 27021. Remember, we sent it not just to the client, to the customer, we sent it to a project within the customer. You can see that data got passed on here. And if I open this up, hopefully you recognize some of these services from the mapping we talked about in QuickBooks setting. You can see the terms came over, the client, customer, everything mapped nicely, and there's our total right here. So click of a button took me 5 seconds, saved you, I don't know, maybe 5 minutes, 3 minutes of data entry if I were to create this manually. So that's what this integration is all about. It's all about, well, partially about saving you time by helping you avoid any duplicate data entry and helping you avoid any typos that might cause some accounting problems down the road. All right, back over to the slide deck. Talked about that. We talked about the accounting destination. Oh, I didn't mention this, but it's worth mentioning. You can control the accounting destination for a project in this screen where you're sending the invoice. You can also control it under the General tab. So you can see the QuickBooks destination is available here. This is going to be important later, so I'm going to mention it now. Think about this as a way to map a Monograph project to a QuickBooks project. That's going to come in handy later when I talk about importing costs. So this is the QuickBooks destination. You can use it to map a Monograph project to a QuickBooks project if you're using QuickBooks projects. Okay, we talked about this. Talked about this already. One last feature of our invoice integration to QBO. If you are a firm that applies taxes to your invoices, we're going to help you out a lot there too. QuickBooks has some nice little features where it can actually calculate your taxes for you. And they make this available to us through the API. So if you're building an invoice in Monograph and you need to add taxes to it, we've already pulled tax calculations over from QBO so that with the click of a button, no math on your side, you just click a button that basically says, hey, calculate the tax for me. We pull your tax rates out of QBO, calculate the tax for you, add it automatically to your invoice so that when you do send that invoice to your client or to QuickBooks, that tax is already there for you. If you send that invoice over to QuickBooks, that tax line item translates very nicely to the QuickBooks tax line items as well. So this area of our integration with QuickBooks is very robust and will save you a lot of time and help you avoid a lot of data entry problems. Some other time savers, marking as paid. You can imagine that after you send an invoice over to QBO, if you apply a payment to that invoice in QBO, we don't want you to have to do that same mark as paid action in Monograph. We actually automatically mark them as paid for you when we detect that you've marked an invoice as paid over in QuickBooks. So if you're familiar with QuickBooks, which most of you probably are, you can see that there's a receive payment button on every invoice. You click on that, it opens up a window, you type in how much payment you received against that invoice. We will detect that event and we will log that payment, and you'll actually see it show up over here in the activity for that invoice. So that's basically a hands-off freebie there that takes you literally no time and helps you avoid any of that duplicate data entry or duplicate action between QuickBooks and Monograph. If you're a firm that has employees that are adding reimbursable and billable expenses to QuickBooks, hopefully that's everyone on this call because you should certainly be doing that. We're also going to save you a bunch of time there. There's no reason that when somebody submits a reimbursable expense for some travel to a client site or a meal that they use for some client entertainment in Monograph, that you should have to recreate those over in QuickBooks. We're going to take care of that for you. We're going to save you time and help you avoid any data entry issues. How does that work? Well, first you're going to need to do some configuration, the same configuration that, similar to the configuration that I went through earlier. So I'll jump back over to Monograph for this. A really quick demo. Over here in settings, sending expenses to QuickBooks. Click on that, go down to expense types. So there's basically two things you need to do to set this up and make this work, to set up this ability to send expenses to QuickBooks. First, you need to tell us which credit accounts over in QuickBooks you want to use for the reimbursable expenses that we send over. You're probably going to pick something like accounts payable. That is the name of an account that we've pulled out of the QuickBooks instance that this firm is connected to. And for non-reimbursable expenses, you need to do the same thing. Pick which credit account you want to use. Probably something like a corporate Visa. That's part one. The next thing you need to do is set the default QuickBooks account for every expense category you've got. So you probably have something like travel. I'll throw that in automobile, meals and entertainment. Do I have something in here for meals? Again, this is a list of all the accounts over in my chart of accounts, essentially coming in from QuickBooks. I'm just going to throw this one under, what do I have? Oh, I don't have something over there that represents meals and entertainment. So let's just pretend that was meals and entertainment. Travel, we'll do automobile as well. So these are the defaults for sending expenses over to QuickBooks. And now let me get back over here. Once that's set up, you're going to want to go to the expense account, the expense report under reports. There you're going to see which expenses have already been sent to QuickBooks. You can see I've got a couple expenses that have already been sent. You're also going to see up in the upper right-hand corner, this option, this new button that will allow you to send to QuickBooks. You click on that. It'll take you to a screen that looks like this, where you'll see a list of all the expenses that have not been sent. So there's 2 expenses. You click here to select which one you want to send over, review the information. And if you want to adjust which QuickBooks account these expenses are being sent to, you can do that here. So you don't have to use those defaults that I set up in settings a minute ago. You can override that here so that when you click that send button, magic happens. We create a bill or an expense, depending on whether it's reimbursable or not, over in QuickBooks. And we use all the data from that line item to pre-fill that for you. So for example, the name becomes a vendor. We'll create that vendor for you if we need to, or we'll map to an existing vendor. The date, bill date, the amount, obviously it becomes the amount here and here. The QuickBooks destination, remember that from earlier, that could be a client or it could be a project or a I should say, the QuickBooks destination could be a QuickBooks customer, which it is in this case, or it could be a QuickBooks sub-customer, or it could be a QuickBooks project. Remember that accounting destination is a very important attribute of your projects. It's really powerful. Pay close attention to it. And of course, you get to pick which account it goes to. This account shows up right here. When we create one of these for you, It also creates a journal entry behind the scenes for you so you can see what the journal entry looks like as well. You might remember when I picked accounts payable as the credit account for reimbursables. So this S means that this little piece of data is coming from that setting that you saw me set earlier. So we take care of all this for you. Again, it's going to save you a lot of time. Entering this manual would take you a few minutes. You do that, 20 times a week to keep track of your team's expenses. We're going to save you hours per week just with the click of a button that sends all these expenses and automatically creates them for you over in QuickBooks. And no chance of data entry errors. Let's move on to syncing consultants and vendors. This works almost identically to the client customer syncing that I started this presentation on. You've got a list of consultants in a list of consultants in Monograph, your structural engineer, your HVAC consultant. You've also got a list of vendors over in QuickBooks. Well, we don't want you to have to go through that duplicate entry of creating things twice or keeping data in sync between two identical consultants / vendors manually. We're going to do that for you. And it works very similar, almost identical to the way that our client customer synchronization works. When you're on the consultants tab in your directory, you're going to see a button up in the upper right, import from QuickBooks. Click that. You'll see a list of all the vendors that are being pulled in from QuickBooks here. You can pick which ones you want to import and then click import. Once you do, those will show up in this list, just like this with a QuickBooks icon next to them. Similarly, when you update any data in Monograph for one of those consultants, it will immediately sync over to QuickBooks and vice versa. When a new vendor is created over in QuickBooks, you'll get prompted to re-import that into Monograph. And when you create a consultant in Monograph, we make it really easy to send that over to QuickBooks for you. So that's going to also save you a lot of time and help you avoid that data entry. Consultant bills, if you're using consultants, hopefully you're also using consultant bills. Consultant bills are a feature we built about halfway through 2023. They allow you to manage those consultant bills that you get from your structural engineers, et cetera. Well, we don't want you to have to re-enter that data that we collect about consultant bills in Monograph over in QuickBooks. Again, that would be dangerous and wasteful of your time. We want to save you that time so you can focus on designing the bill world. So we've made it really easy to send those consultant bills from Monograph to QuickBooks. Let me show you how that's done. This is in Monograph. This is where you are probably hopefully uploading your consultant bills. When you upload a consultant bill, we ask you for some information about it, including which QuickBooks category you want to associate this bill to. So in this case, it's a subcontractor bill. I've got a QuickBooks category, aka a QuickBooks account for subcontractor work. So I've selected that here. Click Save down there. Here's a list of all my consultant bills. You might notice that one has already been sent to QuickBooks. This one has not. This is the one you just saw me enter on the previous screen. Using this menu over here on the right, you simply select Send to QuickBooks Online. And when you do so, we will, behind the scenes, immediately send that over to QuickBooks Online, and you'll see a little success message down in the lower left corner. We're going to take care of that data mapping for you as well. So the consultant that you selected in Monograph is going to be synchronized or going to be used to set the vendor for that bill over in QuickBooks. Remember, these vendors are already syncing with our consultants, so likely it's going to be one and the same. If it's not, I believe we will create a vendor for you. So if you pick a consultant that doesn't exist over in QuickBooks, we'll go ahead and create a vendor for you. The QuickBooks category gets used down here. This is effectively the account that this line item gets associated to. The amount obviously gets used here and up here. The issue date is mapped to here. The due date gets mapped to here. And the image of the invoice, which is cut off here, unfortunately, also gets attached. You can't see it, it's not pictured. But if there is an invoice associated with it, consultant bill, PDF, JPEG, whatever, it will be attached to the bill over in QuickBooks as well. So again, that's going to save you a lot of time and reduce the risk of any data entry. So up to this point, we've been talking a lot about saving time. But you might remember the pyramid that I showed at the beginning of this presentation was all about building towards the top of that pyramid, which was all about profit. So how do we use our integration with QBO to give your firms insights about your project and firm level profit? Well, it starts with a simple calculation, simple formula. This is oversimplified for the purposes of this demonstration, but we all probably understand that profit equals revenue minus costs. We have a very detailed, accurate sense of your revenue as a firm in Monograph because you do all of your invoicing through Monograph. We know how much money is outstanding, how much money has been collected, by who, which project, what line items and services were in those invoices. We know everything we need to know about revenue. We know a little bit about your costs as well. You hopefully have all of your salaries for all of your employees set up in Monograph under those user profiles. That's really important. They're scheduled. That allows us to know very detailed information about where your wage costs are going down to the hour per phase. So we have a lot of your cost information in Monograph already, but we don't have it all. We don't have a lot of your overhead. We don't have a lot of your labor-related expenses. We don't have your non-operating costs. Those are in QuickBooks. This integration, as of a month or so ago, will allow Monograph to pull in those costs that we don't already have in Monograph and use them to kind of round out our profit calculation so that we can give you a very accurate read on profitability. So costs come from Monograph and QBO, revenue comes from Monograph, put those things together, or actually subtract them, and you get profitability. Let's dive a little bit deeper on those project costs. Conceptually, it looks something like this. You've got project costs over in QuickBooks. You've got all your costs over in QuickBooks. Your journal has all your costs. We effectively pull those entries out of your journal into Monograph, and you'll see how in a second we sort and categorize and assign those to projects, etc., people, projects, etc., so that we can give you a very accurate picture of project level profit. I'll get to this in a second. Let's talk about the import process first. So I want to talk about how do we import these costs from QuickBooks into Monograph. We'll go live for this one too. Second, I'm going to switch over to this. So here we are back in good old QuickBooks settings tab, your one-stop shop for everything you need to do to set up QuickBooks integration. And down towards the bottom, there's a button for importing costs. First thing you're going to do is select and assign different accounts in QuickBooks to different cost categories. Think about these 4 tabs across the top as 4 cost categories. As you work your way through this using the next button up here in the upper right-hand corner, we're asking you to tell us which accounts tend to hold costs that correspond to each of these 4 categories. So first, it's asking me, please pick the accounts over in QuickBooks that tend to have project-specific costs in them. So what's project-specific down here? I see a lot of overhead stuff. Let's say, oh, here's some project expenses. Let's grab these. I'm going to go through this quickly. I'll probably pick some that don't make much sense to anybody, but let me just grab a few here just to give you guys a sense of how this works. Purchases, let's say some supplies, travel and travel meals, usually project specific. And yeah, let's say that's it. Oh, I should mention this date. This date's important. This date basically tells us how far back you want us to look when we go to import these costs that we're pulling in from QuickBooks. We don't want you to go too far back, so we've limited this to 2 or 3 years max. But we do allow you to go back in time so that you can start importing these costs and look for profitability on projects that you've been working on for 1 or 2 years, those long projects that you've been working on for many, many months. We want to allow you to get profitability on those as well, so we do allow you to go back in time. I'm only going to go back to the beginning of 2023, as you can see here. I'm going to click next, and we're going to go pick wage cost counts. So wages here, probably just this account, my employee wages, cost of goods sold. Next, I'm going to pick my labor-related costs. Often payroll taxes is one of the accounts that would be considered labor-related. Do I have payroll taxes in here? Let's see. Taxes and licenses. Let's imagine that that's a payroll taxes or something along those lines. And maybe say we consider insurance and workers' comp part of our labor-related expenses. That's up to you. You could include it in your labor-related expenses, in which case it will be used to calculate project profit, or you can consider it part of your operating costs, in which case it won't be part of our project level profit calculation. So we've got a couple here. We're going to be using a labor-related costs, and we're going to use those in the math that we use to calculate project level profit. Click next. Basically want all the rest of these other ones to fall into operating costs here. Go ahead and click Start Import, but keep in mind, it's an important phrase that I want you all to remember. These are what we call cost categories. And I've now told the system that expenses or costs that come in through these different accounts get associated to, by default, to one of these 4 cost categories. So the import is happening behind the scenes. While that's going on, I'm going to jump back over to here, and I'm going to jump to this tab, which is in a different firm that's already been set up. And we're going to look at project profit. So here we are in Area 9 storefront, and I can now see very accurate project profit information, not just at the project level, but also on a phase-by-phase level. The revenue is coming from our invoices. The costs are coming from a combination of salaries and labor-related costs. Add all these up, you can see that the gross profit for this project is actually looking pretty healthy. But looks like, well, construction administration, never super profitable from what I understand. So that's probably looking decently healthy there. We need to obviously have a good profit margin, a gross profit margin for our regular schematic design and construction documentation work. Those are all looking pretty healthy. We've also pulled out consultants here separately so that you can independently analyze whether or not your consultants are actually earning or costing you money. And if I had expenses and other items in this project, you'd see how much revenue we're collecting for billable expenses versus how much expenses or costs we're incurring for other project expenses. I don't have any of those in this demo right now, but you can imagine a very similar graph here telling me how I'm doing revenue versus costs on those types of line items as well. You might have also noticed this banner at the top. It's telling me that, hey, there's 3 more project costs that got imported from QuickBooks that haven't been assigned yet. Let's go take a look at that. So every now and then, when we import costs, we're not going to be able to automatically assign them to projects for you. I'm going to get into that more in a second. But first, I want to show you how to deal with some costs that slide in and you don't know where they go. We don't know automatically which project to assign them to. You simply come to this screen. You can filter and sort to your heart's content. You're going to see the unassigned ones by default. You can see there's other options here, but I just want to look at the unassigned ones. That's most of the time what you're going to want to look at too. Just process these unassigned project costs. So we've got some palm trees from Tanya's nursery. Oh yeah, I maybe talked to a project manager and realized that those all belong to this Aronsdale project. So now I've assigned those 3 previously unassigned project costs to those projects. If those were consultant costs instead of project costs, I could change those here. And if for some reason a cost had been miscategorized in QuickBooks, we could always flip that to be an operating cost instead. So you can change both the cost category and assign project costs here on this review costs page. Click done. Banner goes away. All is well with the world. We're up to date in terms of processing all the costs that we've imported from QuickBooks. All right. Here for a second. Did the demo there. Talked about that, talked about that, talked about that, talked about that. Let's talk about saving you a little bit more time. As I said, sometimes when we import costs, Monograph doesn't know how to automatically assign those to projects. There are 3 things you can do to save yourselves a lot of time when it comes to assigning those inbound costs that we're pulling in from QuickBooks. One is make sure you're sending expenses from Monograph to QuickBooks. I showed you how to do that earlier. When your employees are logging expenses in their timesheets, use that send to QuickBooks function. When you send those expenses over to QuickBooks, guess what? When they come back into us from your journal as costs, we know exactly which project to assign them to. We will take care of that for you. Same thing with consultant bills. Use our consultant bills feature to collect and manage your consultant bills. And as you saw earlier, use that send to QuickBooks button to send those consultant bills over to QuickBooks. That's going to save you some time because when we look at the journal entries to pull those costs back in, we're going to know, hey, I recognize that consultant bill. I know which project it was part of, and we're going to automatically assign that to a project. Last but not least, I've talked about the QuickBooks destination a few times now. You saw it earlier when I was talking through the Monograph ability to send invoices over to QuickBooks. Map those projects, meaning go into, I'll show you. Why not? Let me go off script for a second. Go into your projects. Let's go to my one project that's in this demo. Go to edit. Go to general. Make sure you have this QuickBooks destination set up. If you have projects, pick a project. If you have sub-customers, pick a sub-customers. If you don't, then just go ahead and pick the customer. In this case, Amy's Bird Sanctuary, this is the Wurtland work. So we're going to make sure that we've mapped this project to this QBO project. That is going to save you lots of time because if you're doing a good job assigning things to projects over in QuickBooks, when we see expenses come in from QuickBooks that are assigned to, where was I? The Wurtland Mall project over in QuickBooks, we're going to know that that goes to 130 Wurtland in Monograph. So we're going to automatically assign those costs to the project for you. And that's going to save you even more time. Now, that's not all. Right around the corner, and I'm talking a couple weeks, maybe a month out, a new firm level profit report that's also going to be driven by your imported QBO costs. This is also going to be driven by your QBO integration. So if you're a firm out there that has QBO and hasn't connected to Monograph, hopefully you're motivated enough at this point to get that connection going and start using these features that are not just going to save you time, not just going to help you avoid accounting and typos, those types of errors, but it's also going to start giving you some very, very insightful information about not just your project level profitability, but your firm level profitability as well. This is effectively our version of a P&L. If you look closely here, you can see kind of a mini P&L statement that shows you month by month how much revenue you're taking, what your direct costs are, your gross profit, your operating costs, your operating income, non-operating income, and net profit. This is coming out soon. It's basically a very, very friendly, principal project manager friendly way of looking at your firm's profit from a P&L perspective. You'll be able to export it as well. So keep an eye out for this. It's coming super soon. So wrap it all up. Hopefully you agree now that we've got a fairly reliable, seamless synchronization that keeps a lot of the most important data in sync between Monograph and QuickBooks. You saw a lot of things that this integration does that saves you a lot of time and avoids those accounting errors and typos. You saw how we pull that cost data in to give you project profitability insights, and right around the corner, we're going to be giving you more and more insights at the firm level around profitability. That report you just saw a second ago is just the tip of an iceberg. There's a lot right behind it. So a lot of exciting things to come. You don't have to take it from me. We talked to a lot of our customers. We love to hear from our customers. Jules from Cascadia said something really kind I wanted to share with all of you. I'll let you read it, but it just ends with, it's pretty awesome. And she's referring to the QuickBooks Online integration. So I love to hear things like that. The whole team does. She told us that using the QuickBooks Online integration, her billing process is 2 times faster, and she saved 50% of her time on administration. Jules, if you're out there, thanks for sharing that with us. Makes us all smile here at Monograph. So thank you. We're at the end of the main part of this presentation, so I am going to take a quick breather, grab a sip of water, and kick it over to Eileen for a second.
Thank you. Fantastic. I know that I've covered a lot about the recordings. We will be sending the recording. Just usually it takes us about a week to get it all recorded, sent out to you, and any questions answered. As Pete said, I'm going to give him a chance to get a little sip of water, take a breather after all that knowledge that he shared with us. And also I'm giving him a chance to look through the questions in the Q&A so he can decide which are some of the ones that he wants to go ahead and answer first based on some of those themes. And Pete, if you'll go to the next slide, I'll buy you a couple more minutes also. All right. And so our next webinar is going to be in May. We are going to be talking about staffing. We have a ton of fantastic changes coming to staffing that's going to streamline the whole process for you based on a lot of these feedback sessions that we've had with various of you that are here in this meeting with us. So keep an eye out. You will get an invitation either in your inbox via our newsletter or also in the app. We usually have that banner at the top, and that will send you to the register link. So we are expecting that in May, date TBD, but it will definitely be in May. And with that said, Pete, are you ready to answer some questions? We have
Yeah,
a good
sure,
amount of time.
sure. So I understand that there were quite a few questions coming up about customers, sub-customers, and projects. So let me dive into that a little bit. Let's see if I can get rid of that. So over in QuickBooks, it's fun. It's interesting. It can be a headache sometimes. I'm sure a lot of you would agree. It has this concept of customers, but also has this concept of sub-customers. Often we see our customers, our firms, using sub-customers to represent projects. That's an alternative to actually using the real project objects in QuickBooks. Alternatively to using sub-customers, you can see two sub-customers here. You can create projects. Projects also belong to customers. Projects and sub-customers are very similar. We almost treat them identically. They basically represent a project to us, whether they're called a sub-customer or a project. In most of our firm's world, those sub-customers are often referred to projects. So this QuickBooks destination allows you to push invoices to not just clients, but to projects or sub-customers within your customer list over in QuickBooks. So actually, a little bit more of what is happening behind the scenes there. When we pull your customers in for the first time from QuickBooks, when we pull this list of customers in, we're not just pulling the level 0 is what we call them. We're not just pulling this top level list of customers. We're pulling this whole tree in. So Freeman would come in, and underneath that, we'd pull these two sub-customers as well. So if we had any projects with Freeman Sporting Goods and we wanted to send invoices, if we had the Ocean View Road project, we'd probably want to set the accounting destination in Monograph, this, to Ocean View Road, so that when we send invoices for that project, they show up within this sub-customer in QuickBooks. And when expenses or costs that are associated with this project get pulled in from QuickBooks, we automatically know which Monograph project to assign those to. Hopefully that covers the questions that were out there around.
Pete, one follow-up on that is the contact information on the invoice and whether it can be represented from a sub-customer. That was the other set of questions around that.
Yeah, great question. No, the information that you see on a Monograph invoice, let me open up a Monograph invoice. It comes from, let me get to invoices here. It comes from the client, not from the sub-customer project. So if I go to those invoices, 1301 Wurtland, let me open up one of them. Let's take a look at this one. Sent to QBO. This information is coming out of the client. Sorry, the customer, not the project. So if we went to Amy's Bird Sanctuary, this is the information we're using, which is synced over to Amy in our directory as well. Clients, Amy. Hopefully I've gotten all those questions about the sub-customers and projects. If not, I'll look through the list again here. Let me see what other topics have come up.
And Pete, I can also serve you up some questions if you like. Would
I
be
see
helpful?
one here that
Okay.
seems to be a cluster around paid syncing going from Monograph to QuickBooks. So let me step into that one. And Eileen, if you see any specific questions about this one, about this area, please go ahead and speak up. But effectively, in QuickBooks, I might actually be able to do this live. Under your invoices, where's that invoice I created? There it is right there. You have the ability to receive a payment. So if I say we received this amount from a cash payment for this invoice, click Save and Close. I've now registered a payment against that. And that should, and it might take a little bit of time, but what that will eventually do is show up against that invoice for our project. Let's see if it's shown up yet. Yeah. So it's simple as that. Hopefully that makes sense. Eileen, were there any more specific questions, or did they just want to see that in action?
I think the
I
question
think
was more direct. Sorry, Eileen. The direction. Being able to mark an invoice that's paid in Monograph and have it represented that way in QBO.
Oh yeah, great question. Coming soon is the short answer. Yeah, when we did some research around that mark is paid functionality, we found that most of our firms and the bookkeepers at most of our firms were in the habit of collecting those payments and marking payments against invoices in QuickBooks. So that was kind of the starting point for that workflow. So we built the integration first so that it flowed from QuickBooks to Monograph. However, because we support electronic payments and because we still see a lot of firms that actually use Monograph as the hub for where they mark things as paid, we're looking at building the reverse direction of that integration sometimes later this quarter, so that when you go into a unpaid invoice, which I believe I might have one. Here's one right. Oh, no, I don't have an unpaid invoice. But imagine this was unpaid. If I were to mark it as paid, which you can do using a button that shows up over here, this is a draft. I can't mark it as paid. But if you were to add a payment through Monograph, we will, at the end of this quarter, sometime later this quarter, be automatically generating the right payment objects and journal entries over in QuickBooks for you. So that's coming soon.
one here, Pete, for you. And I
sure.
think you might have covered this, but just to clarify. So the question is, who drives the information? Is it Monograph or QBO, or is everything flowing back and forth between the two apps?
It depends which part of the integration you're talking about. So for invoices, expenses, and consultant bills, the information almost entirely flows from Monograph to QuickBooks. It's kind of a one-way send. The exception is what we just saw with invoices, where if you mark an invoice as paid in QuickBooks, that will flow upstream to Monograph and mark it as paid in Monograph. But in general, the answer is for those three things, invoices, expenses, consultant bills, the information flows from Monograph to QuickBooks. For other objects like clients and customers, vendors slash consultants, the information flows both ways. So updates in one, whether it's in QuickBooks or Monograph, will be reflected in the other and vice versa. You think that's the answer they were looking for, Eileen?
I think so.
Cool.
That's
Thanks.
helpful for me.
Got any other good ones?
Yeah, let's see. I've been trying to pick some out that would be easier to answer in this kind of setting. I have one here which says, are operating costs calculated into the project profit report?
Great question. They are not. Operating costs are, in our opinion, not something that a project manager has a lot of control over. And we built that project level profit report to give a project manager a sense of how they're doing on their phases, their consultant management, and on their expense management. However, the firm level report, that firm level P&L that I showed you at the very end, that will include not just your operating, but also some non-operating costs that we're going to start importing shortly. So think of the project level profit as a gross project level profit report. The firm level profit will be a net profit report, a net P&L essentially. Good question. I'm glad
And
that
as a follow-up, someone was just clarifying that the labor-related costs are included in that. Is that
That's
correct?
exactly right. Labor-related costs, we treat that like a multiplier and spread that out based on how much wage money you're putting into each phase in each project. Good question. I see a question here from Melanie. Is there a plan to be able to select sub-customers or projects in the Bill To section of the invoice builder? I think I know what you're after there, Melanie, because sometimes you have different contact information, and sometimes that different contact information comes from sub-customers over in QuickBooks. We are going to allow you to set that contact information to alternate contacts, or you might think of them as sub-contacts at your client. And yes, amongst those options, you'll be able to pick sub-customers from QuickBooks or kind of just override it manually and type in somebody that is like a new contact, for example. So the answer is there is a plan. TBD on timing, though, probably not this quarter. But it is something we hear and we do have our eye on. Good question, Melanie. Thank you.
I have another one here, clarity of workflow, which is if an invoice is sent via Monograph, when the client receives it, are they paying through QuickBooks or are they paying through Monograph?
Oh, great question. We want them paying through Monograph. We have a very nice experience set up for customers, your clients, to pay online. It will save you time. It will get you paid twice as fast. We have data that shows anyone who uses Monograph invoicing plus Monograph payments actually gets paid twice as fast as people who do not use Monograph payments. So they will actually pay through Monograph. And again, later this quarter, when they do pay through Monograph, we're going to create transactions over in QuickBooks to basically automatically represent that payment so your bookkeeper doesn't have to do that double data entry. That will hopefully be coming sometime later this quarter. Great question.
I just saw one come in about invoices and the ability to edit. Is there an ability to edit an invoice after it's been issued? I know this is a Monograph method type question.
Yeah. Short answer is no. We believe that when you open an invoice and issue it to your client, it's important from a business perspective to maintain the sanctity of that invoice. So we do not allow you to modify that invoice after it has been opened. Rada has a really good question. It's actually a really good idea. Can the invoice transaction in QBO, i.e. when you send an invoice from Monograph to QBO, automatically attach a PDF copy of the Monograph invoice? I think that's possible. We don't do it now, but sounds like something we could look into, Rada. That's an interesting idea, something we can definitely look into. Deacon asks, there are several ways in QBO to receive a payment. Do they all work the same? I believe the answer is yes, Deacon, as long as they result in a transaction that is tied to that invoice that is considered a payment. There are multiple UI points in QuickBooks that all do that, and they should all result in a payment being logged against that invoice in Monograph. So I believe the answer is yes to that question, Deacon.
A few questions about consultant bills getting marked as paid and whether that's available now or coming.
Yeah, good question. It's not something we support now, but it's something we're keeping an eye on. I cannot say it's on the roadmap for this quarter, so probably sometime after this quarter, but not too long after this quarter. We philosophically are getting in bed with QBO, so to speak. So you can expect Monograph to continue to improve this integration pretty much constantly for the foreseeable future. There are a lot of small additional improvements that we can make, like the ones that were just mentioned. So don't expect us to walk away from this integration. It's something we'll be continually investing in because we realize that Monograph plus QBO is essentially the operating system stack that your firms need to both manage their projects, their people, forecast, plan, and bookkeep. What do you got, Eileen?
Is it possible to email a Monograph generated invoice to a client with a QB online payment link? Sorry, I know that's an easy no.
With a QBO online payment link?
Yeah.
No, that's not possible. The emails that go out from Monograph when you're payment enabled have very clear links and a nice UI to allow that client to pay via Monograph, not via QBO. We really
I
believe that you should be sending your invoices from Monograph to QBO, getting paid through sending your invoices from Monograph to your client and then sending them to QBO. The payment should come in from your client via the Monograph payment platform. That will keep the chances of errors low. It'll accelerate your time to payment, and it will save you a lot of time and avoid you a lot of potential bookkeeping errors. Mary Kay asked a good question. She asked, can the assignment of QB accounts to Monograph cost categories be changed later? Great question, Mary. I didn't mention this earlier, but the answer is yes. If you make a mistake, you can go back in and edit those assignments. You can also think about those assignments that I went through that had the 4 tabs at the top. Those are how we assign the inbound costs by default. You can use that cost review screen that I showed a little bit later to actually change that later. So it's not written in stone what you set up when you're assigning QB accounts to those 4 cost categories. Sorry, Arlene, did you have one more?
Nope.
I have
I did
one
not.
spicy one that we should
One
just
spicy, yeah.
clear
Way to
with
end.
everyone. Will there be any integration or ability to import data from QBD, the desktop version, in the future?
The short answer is no. If you follow along with Intuit's news around QBD like I do, you're probably aware that they are as rapidly and as forcefully as possible moving people off of QBD because they don't want to support it anymore. It's not 6 months goes by that I don't hear that they are deprecating or end of lifing another version of QBD. So we don't have any plans to build integration with a product that is effectively being shut down by Intuit. We're going to focus on QBO. That's what we believe the future is. And the integration opportunities and the user flows that we can build with QBO are much nicer than the ones that we could ever build with QBD. Good question. Hopefully that doesn't come as too bad news. If you're interested in moving from QBD to QBO, we have a lot of firms that have done that just because this integration is so powerful. Please reach out to our customer success team. They can point you to some articles about how easy it is to actually move from QBD to QBO. I see one last question from an anonymous attendee that I have to answer. How is this better than QBO's P&L? Oof, great question. You're talking about the P&L that we're getting ready to release, our firm level P&L report. It's better because Monograph has much more insightful, detailed data about where your team's time is spent in terms of projects and overhead work. Unless you are set up in QuickBooks in a very advanced fashion to where you have representations for all of your phase types, all of your overhead types, and you're doing all of your timekeeping in QuickBooks, Monograph's P&L is going to be much more accurate, especially when you get down to the project level. Those gross profit reports at the project level are something that QBO basically can't do. I would also argue that the user interface that we provide around our firm level P&L and our project level profit is much better than what you see here. I constantly struggle when I have to jump into QuickBooks and try to find things. It's also pretty glitchy, as my kids would say. So I think there's a number of reasons why Monograph's P&L, profit reporting, and the insights that we're going to continue to build on top of those are much better and increasingly better than what QBO provides. QBO is great at their bookkeeping, tax services, and accounting functionality. We're not trying to go there. But in terms of surfacing insightful profit information that your firm can act on, both at the project and the firm level, that's something we already do better than QBO and will continue to improve. That's it. 2 minutes over.
Right. Yeah, we are at time. Thank you to everyone that stayed with us the entire hour. It was great to see Pete walk through all of this. We will also look through any questions that we didn't have a chance to answer and either add them as content to our knowledge base or also add them to the email with the recording. And hopefully we will see you in May for our next webinar on staffing. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.